Who are the two Arcanist Masters that feel the most competitive right now?
Looking at those cards and going, I think they're going to be very interesting going forward. I think they've probably got my early eye on something that people are going to complain about, even if they don't necessarily need a nerf.
Do you have any predictions on things that we might go, well, this needs to be looked at, or this is a concern outside of what we've talked about so far?
There are few things better than stepping away from the screens, unplugging and sitting around a table to do battle with your friends. Every week, Third Floor Wars brings you the latest strategies, tactics, and reviews on board games, card games, and miniature games like Malifaux. If you want useful information on the games you already play, or new insights on great games other people are playing, you are in the right place. Craig and Ray welcome you to the Third Floor and the Tabletop Talk broadcast.
Craig here on the Third Floor, and today we have James Doxey to talk about Malifaux 3rd Edition, the UK competitive scene, and the most recent tournament where he podiumed. Now, you might know James as one of the prominent Malifaux players in the UK. He was a regular contributor to Ben Syme's Arcane Reservoir podcast, which was, I think, one of the best podcasts about Malifaux. It was really too bad to see it kind of die out. So, James, welcome to the Third Floor.
Thank you very much, and thank you for having me.
Yeah, man. Can you give us a quick background for people that are not familiar with you?
Yeah, no problem. So I've been playing Malifaux pretty much as long as there's been Malifaux, so since the first book of First Edition. Been hanging around since then. Involved in a lot of sort of the structural stuff of the UK scene, set up the first rankings, was sort of casually sort of side involved in a lot of things from Arcane Reservoir, which, as you say, is brilliant, through sort of helping occasionally organise the Nationals and some other stuff. And I moderate the Weird forums, so you'll see me on there as Mythic Fox.
Very, very cool. I've been following you on Twitter for a while, James, and I am getting a sense that you've been playing some M3E. So I just kind of want to give kind of your high-level thoughts. How do you feel about the new edition? Were you involved in the testing at all? I'm anxious to hear.
Yeah, I mean, I took a bit of a break from Malifaux, like a lot of players, come the end of second edition. So I got back involved probably back end of the open beta. I think from my perspective, what I'm liking a lot about M3 is it's probably the best of both editions. So having played first edition and played second edition, this feels kind of like quite an interesting sort of halfway between the two, and with a really, so like I said, best of both worlds feel.
So I didn't play first edition. That's interesting to me. So what aspect of first edition do you see sneaking into third?
So a lot of the sort of first edition was very cluttered in the sense that sort of, models were routinely requiring sort of 2 cards and tiny font to get all their rules on. That's why a lot of that went away in second edition. We got a lot through upgrades, sort of first edition probably played in a more, each victory point mattered, probably more than each victory point mattered in second edition, certainly towards the end of first edition. That sort of scoring to 8 is very reminiscent of first edition. The way models feel whole without upgrades now. That's very first edition. So there is a sort of, it does, best of both worlds, but it is a little bit, it's in the way the game kind of feels to play. It feels a lot more kind of contained. Masters have their own, probably more identity now through the keywords, which again is more reminiscent of first edition. First edition crews were probably less sort of a mishmash than they became by the end of second edition.
Right. It probably the biggest takeaway I've had from the scoring perspective is it. To your point, it feels like every action matters. Like there isn't throwaway stuff like you used to have in 2E where you go, well, it really doesn't matter what this guy does. It feels like between turn 1 and turn 5, like I have to think a lot about everything that I do. Are you feeling that same way?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think you're scoring, every point matters because you're scoring less points, right? And you're scoring less points over, over less time. So in second edition, you were contesting pretty much all of the 10 points each. So you could score up to 10 points yourself. You could prevent up to 10 points for your opponent scoring. And you could score in big blocks. So some of those schemes would score 3 points at once. And you don't do that anymore. So now when I look at it, in third edition, you're scoring well, technically up to 8 points each, but in practice, that third and certainly the fourth strategy point are nearly impossible to get hold of. Certainly that fourth strategy point's really, really difficult. As are, probably some of the second point, or at least one of the schemes, is usually pretty prohibitive.
Mm-hmm.
So you tend to find you're maybe, so the points you're contesting with your opponent, is narrowed to maybe by the time you can't really stop the first strategy point being scored for each of you. Pretty much if your first strategy points are given and the fourth one's unachievable, on strategy, you may be contesting 2 strategy points, whereas you'd be contesting probably more like 4 in second edition. So you've got that real kind of, you're contesting probably fewer moments in the game, but contesting them more hardly. Hardly's not the right word, but there we go. I'll fail English Sunday afternoon. I'm lightly caffeinated right now.
I hadn't thought about that just from a pure mathematical sense. It's just every point is just amplified, not just because of the reduction to 8, but to your point, that you only get a second point for that strat or for that scheme. And that third and fourth point is no joke on those strategies. So maybe that's why it feels to me just so much more intense, and that in a good way.
Yeah, absolutely that. And I think the sort of the models being less killy actually kind of falls into that a lot more as well. So I think where you've got models are kind of in danger more. Mm-hmm. Because they're sort of oddly, because they're living longer, it's sort of like they're in danger more. Where before, like things are, someone would swoop in and delete a model, it's off the table now. But now you're giving a lot more sort of standing punch ups. It feels like I've got to get this right because it's the difference between life or death for this model more than I think it was in second edition.
Yeah, and you got more to think about in turn 3, 3 and 4, just because there's more models against you and there's more models at your disposal. So.
Yeah, absolutely. There's more models alive. You've got more choices as well. So even if you're outnumbered, like when and where you use your pass tokens is still a decision. So sometimes your activation decisions don't drop off the way they did in second edition when you were running out of models towards the end of a turn or end of a game.
So what do you think's driving your excitement right now? So if you were talking to somebody who's never played 3 and you were to kind of say, look, this is the 2 or 3 things that make this worth coming back to. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think certainly for players returning, I mean, it's the same, but it's fresh. So it's that refreshed feel. Everything works a bit differently. Everything's cleaned up a bit. There's tons of ground to explore. And I think one of the great things right now is everybody works a little bit differently to the way they worked in second edition. So all of that stuff that you've got, all of your models work slightly differently now, and that means there's just so much sort of fresh ground to explore. That's probably the first thing. The second thing is it's a lot cleaner. The way they've sorted out and sort of standardized conditions. The way they've sorted some of the sort of the strategy scoring out means that the game's a lot cleaner. I think I've likened it in the past to sort of Malifaux with its bedroom tidied on its best behavior. So it kind of feels pretty good in that respect. And also crews are the theming, the sort of the focus on theming actually means that crews feel distinct. So, a Keris crew for me doesn't feel, it isn't just Keris leading the same models, like towards the end of second edition, pretty much the crew would stay the same. You might swap the master out, but the crew is broadly the same. It doesn't feel like that now. A Keris crew will feel different to, and contain quite different models to, say, a Mayfang crew, and that's something to be celebrated.
So one of the changes, there's a couple changes that I'm not necessarily against, but made me scratch my head a little bit. So I'm anxious to hear what your thoughts on. The first thing is during the pregame and the addition of declaring masters to each other before you build crews. How does that felt to you? Do you think you have any insight on maybe why that was a decision that was made and what you like or maybe you're concerned about?
Yeah, I mean, it's not one I have a firm view on. I mean, I think there's as to why the change was made, I suppose with sort of keywording, it kind of matters less. So before you had keywords, I'm trying the right way to phrase this. Before you had keywords, you could pick just about anything. So the knowledge of what the master was probably wasn't terribly relevant. And you think back to second edition, and I'm a long-standing Arcanist, so most things are viewed through the Arcanist prism. You had a weird mind games of like, if you're playing Arcanist on Arcanist, do you take Marcus? Because beasts are really important in second edition Arcanists, and it's like if you take Marcus, do I take Marcus and do I take Beasts? And sort of there was a weird mind games there, and maybe what this helps do with the theming and the keywording is sort of like get us out of having to make those really weird sort of second guess choices on in certain matchups. I don't know if I've still not become sold on whether or not this is a good thing or a bad thing. I suspect I'll have a much firmer view, in a few months' time, but there don't seem to be that many sort of hard counters available. It's not like, because there's no mercenaries anymore, it's not like you can bring in things that are, incredibly harmful if you theme one way or the other. So I can take this or leave this as a change for me. Yeah.
And, even if you're trying to buy counters out of keyword and faction, you're paying for it. So I'm kind of where you are, James. I haven't decided, like, it hasn't affected anything for me. Right. So in the games that I've played, I didn't finish it going, son of a bitch. Why did, this declaring master stuff is terrible. So I've never been there, but it's just, it's odd. So,
it's odd. I mean, I seem to recall, and I could be mistaken. I seem to think by the end of first edition, that was how we were doing competitive play in first edition, because of there were some weird things where, like, if someone went, you needed, and that was certainly a balancing factor for some very powerful masters. Was sort of having to knowing you were going into a very powerful master, certain very powerful masters. It was kind of a bit of a course correction back in first edition, but I don't ever remember it being problematic. I mean, oddly, if you go through to the pre-game process, there are some things in there I'd have changed before this, like why are we setting up terrain before we know where we need to go from and to? It's always thrown me as I'm not sure why we're doing that, because it just means you set up a board and then realize, oh yeah, and then to put markers in the middle of this impassable terrain. There are probably other things I would have gone to first as a change, but I'm not, like you say, not against it one way or the other.
How about the other one that I've been tackling with, and when I was all theory, hadn't played a game, I was like, this is terrible, it's bad for the game, don't know what they're doing. And then as I've gotten some games under my belt, I'm like, it's really not bothering me that much, and that's the ability to hire a second master.
Yeah, I mean, this is another one. So and again, that's another thing you used to be able to do in first edition. I don't necessarily like it, because there's a weird game design thing with, like, what we're trying to do this edition through the keyword is kind of bring themed crews back. And this change to add second masters kind of feels like it's working in the opposite of that design goal.
Yeah.
Now, I mean, it's one of those where long term, I mean, you may well get outlawed in gaining grounds. I've played against one of my regular opponents does this a lot. He kind of hires a lot of multiple masters, and it's I think in the first time we sat down to play M3E. He hired three masters. He hired two masters. He brought a master and hired two masters. So I'm sat there against three masters, and I brought kind of a fairly fluffy Mei Feng crew just to try the rules out. And it's like, bam, three masters. But I wouldn't say that I found it overwhelming to play against. I think, I actually think in some respects it's not overly effective. And what I worry about slightly, and this isn't something I've seen yet, is where you get masters that are potentially very killy.
Right.
So sort of like your prime, where we might find a problem is like where your primary, instead of hiring your 10 stone beta, you're hiring a 16 stone combat master. And that's possibly where we might see some breakpoints, or if there are any weird synergies that haven't been properly, sort of a lot of the worst things are kind of are built out in the cards. So it's like, a lot of abilities only work if the master is also the leader. Which also sort of tends to shut down some of the worst, potential abuses of multiple masters. So I'm not sure. I don't see it as a problem yet, but I'm sure. I think it's one of those things that we can revisit. It'd be very easy to fix in gaining grounds if we think it's, if it ultimately becomes a problem. So I'm not worried about it.
Yeah, and I feel the same way. I mean, our local guild players are, hiring Lady J a lot, and. But again, I'm not seeing feedback from everybody saying, this stuff is broken. So that's good. And I think, to your point, James, it's one of those things that we have not unleashed this edition onto the competitive testing grounds. So I think that this is one of those things that we'll know in 6 to 12 months of some real testing out in the real world with a ton of people, it'll sort itself out. And they've got the gaining grounds thing to kind of, work with that. Is there anything else that you think, a year from now, you and I get back on and we talk again? Do you have any predictions on things that we might go, well, this needs to be looked at, or this is a concern outside of what we talked about so far?
I mean, I think probably the one thing I was expecting to be addressed through third edition that hasn't been is probably model bloat in terms of the range. Like, I would have been very supportive if they'd have gone, okay, we've got, because there's a lot of models currently in Malifaux, a lot of different kinds of model, and I'd have been fairly supportive if they'd have gone, right, these 6 random models from Arcanists, say, I'm going to pick some, December Acolyte, Union Miner, Rail Worker, Steam Fitter, or, 3 of those are just generic dudes with different mechanical parts, right? If we'd have just collected all of those models and called them Arcanist Activist or something, and kind of group them together, go, right, those are now that model, to reduce the number of different models in the range, and that could have been done across the factions. So I kind of wonder, like, if we're going forward, we're going to get a lot of new models into an already expansive range. I think that's a potential, risk that will need addressing. But, in terms of, it's difficult to predict. And I think to your point, like, we haven't fully competitively tested yet. Well, I think you're right, you're absolutely right. And I think anyone that's sort of trying to tell you how M3 is going to shake out now probably, will be proved wrong. So I think we've got to wait and see. But yeah, that'd probably be the thing I was expecting to see addressed that hasn't been. But, that's not necessarily a problem for us. It's more a problem for store owners and for Weird themselves.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I mean, I think it helps that the models, and this is not derogatory, the models are simpler. I mean, it doesn't take me a half an hour to explain to you what a Kantari does now. It did before. And a steam fitter, that took forever to explain to somebody when they said, oh, what's that model do? But now it's simplified, but it's still the same number of models. And I think that's one to definitely keep the eyes on. You may not know this, but I love really everything about Malifaux except for the Arcanist faction. I've got just a completely irrational hatred of it, of that entire faction. So credit to me for allowing you to come on the show, that
Absolutely.
being considered. But I do want to hear about, kind of how does the faction feel for you in 3? How many masters have you gotten under your belt? There's a lot of Arcanist players that are anxious to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, I've played with most of them now. The 3 I haven't played with, I've not played with Colette because everybody plays Colette, and she gets, I think at one point in the beta forum, I did a quick count, and I pointed out that like half the posts in the beta forum were about Colette, and maybe we should look at some of the other masters. So I haven't personally played Colette yet. I haven't personally played Marcus because Marcus actually doesn't interest me. Good riddance to the Neverborn. And I haven't got Hoffman on the board yet, and he's actually one of the ones I'm quite excited to try. All of the others I've had at least probably a couple of games with. And I think as a faction, I mean, again, to my earlier point, anyone who tells you how how this is going to shake out in a year is probably wrong. So take this with a pinch of salt. But I think we're in a really good space. I've played a couple of events. I've done reasonably well. Certainly my teammates would point out that's because Arcanists are broken and not because I'm a good player. I'll let people form their own opinions. But no, I think we're in I think as a faction we're in a really good space. What we have is objective runners. We've got some really quality objective runners right now, and sort of in breadth, and that's always what you need. If you've got decent objective runners, if you've got you've got decent beaters, and we do, then you're not going to have a particularly terrible edition. So provided things, and obviously things could change between now and the final release, but I think we're in a fair space, and I don't see a strategy or scheme pool come up that I go, we got nothing for this. I think we're in a good spot.
So, and I want to talk of power levels and effectiveness in a second, but before we do that, who are you having the most fun with?
I love Karis. I've loved Karis since she appeared. She's my favourite. She's been particularly rubbish for 2 editions. So I'm not yet sold that she's top tier, but she's certainly very interesting to play now. So I'm certainly having a lot of fun with Karis, and just setting my opponent's stuff on fire is a lot of fun. So that's it for me.
Who are the 2 Arcanist Masters that feel the most competitive right now?
I think Sandeep is certainly there now. Now, some of that is probably familiarity. Summoning is still powerful. It's not been, it doesn't feel as ridiculous as it did in second edition. The controls on that are really good. I played a game at the weekend, and I'm going to talk about that. I was playing against a summoner with Keris. I think we got to a point where I was picking up 6 pass tokens at the start of turns because I was heavily outnumbered. And I was still well in that game, so I don't think it's too bad. But yeah, certainly right now, Sandeep feels really good. I like Keris. I think people are talking Tony down. I think we'll find probably Tony's got some really interesting stuff as we go. I'm not as sold on Mei Feng as some people, but I know she's doing great guns. I mean, she's got a lot of mobility, which is what you want. So I'd struggle to pick a second. I think right now Sandeep is certainly in a good space, and I don't think I think I could actually probably name 3 or 4 different Arcanist Masters that could also be very easily be competitive. So
that's a good thing.
Yeah, this is it. I'm not worried about where we are as a faction because I've not seen this is rubbish, that's rubbish. Actually we've got stuff that works.
Very, very cool. All right, we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, I'm going to talk to James a little bit more about kind of what's happening on the UK scene and kind of get a feel for it. So we'll be right back. So, James, one of the reasons that I started Third Floor Wars was I wanted to put a competitive Masters type scene together for the US, and that it was out of sheer envy for what you guys were doing over in the UK. After a couple of years of watching you guys just have so much fun as an active meta, as a competitive meta, I just felt like those of us on this side of the pond were a little bit behind. But I also get a sense that the scene kind of dipped a little bit after the announcement of a new edition came out. And I know that you kind of ghosted for a little bit, but have come back. So can you kind of give me a feel of kind of where we were in the UK, where we are now, and what level of optimism do you have about the future of the game?
Yeah, absolutely. So as you saw, I stepped out of the scene probably at its peak. Lots of events going on, and I sort of stepped out just prior to the announcement / leak of the third edition, and I stepped out for some career stuff and did with some other things personally. And played around with a few other games in the meantime that I didn't need quite the same level of investment to. But I know that the scene, like I think a lot of scenes around the rest of the country, I mean, around the rest of the world, I think did take a significant dip in the gap, because once an edition of the game is over, it's very difficult to have the same level of investment, because you don't know if you're investing in anything with the future, do you? You buy a model, is that model going to be any good? It's difficult to invest in painting a new crew because you know if the crew's going to work. And so naturally, I think, in the gap between the knowledge that third edition was coming and today, the scene has had a degree of atrophy. Events are still happening, but attendance is down, and that's probably a natural part of the cycle. But now the beta's locked, and I know a lot of people through the open beta were saying, well, a lot of players don't enjoy playtest, which is perfectly fair. Stuff changing every week. Malifaux is a hard game to grasp at the best of times. So, and with things changing every week, it can be difficult. I joke sometimes I'm still trying to use first edition rules every now and again. I go, I'm still charging, getting one attack, and with a positive damage flip, I think was the rule in first edition. Just occasionally I get that kind of, I'm going to admit, no, that must have been like 2 editions ago. Yeah. So I think now we've got beta locked. I think we're starting to see returning players come back, existing players, people who've got suitcases full of Malifaux stuff that has been sat on the shelf since, as sort of looking at coming back. Certainly, I'm seeing more and more people that I know playing, tweeting and saying, "Oh, I'm playing my first game, really enjoyed it." I've not heard anyone who's sort of looked at coming back, had a game of M3, gone, actually, I didn't enjoy that. I think everyone's had really positive thoughts, and I'm really positive. Look, events seem to be picking up and gaining more players of late, and I expect that we'll get an influx of returning players now. Beta's locked, and then when the sort of the full retail launch of third edition and there's shiny new models appear, I think we'll get an influx of new players, and I think we'll build back to where we were. But we still have a viable scene today. That's probably the underlying point. It's just smaller than it was, but.
Yeah, and it's I think anybody who is portending the death of Malifaux based off of what we've seen over the last 8-9 months is getting way ahead of themselves, because I do think that it's going to be, I can go buy the rule book, I can buy new cards, I can buy new models. Then we'll see, right? And then whether this game attracts new players.
Yeah, and the death of this game's been predicted before many times. Going way back to first edition, and there's a thought about can you get a game of Malifaux? Well, I went to a tournament, this weekend. I have one next weekend and the weekend after.
That's pretty good.
You can get a game, and provided I think you can pretty much anywhere in the country you can get a game. Plenty of people have got Malifaux gear. It doesn't. It doesn't spoil. It's not fruit or vegetables, is it? Those models are still in your case. They still work. Your fake deck's still got 54 cards in it, hopefully. I think it's ripe to come back and attract new players. And this, it's a fantastic setting. Above all else, it's a fantastic world and setting. And I think with people being positive and just playing more Malifaux, build it and they'll come.
Yeah, and I agree with you on the setting, James. And that's why there's, from a competitive standpoint, I love the keyword thing, but I just love from a God, this is so cool aspect. Love the keyword. Love seeing just thematic crews as opposed to the A team of the Gremlins or the A team of Guild. So no, I agree. So out of curiosity, James, you mentioned you went out and played a couple other games. Can you give us an idea what games you fooled around with, and were there things about those games you liked, or things about Malifaux you missed?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I sort of stepped into Legend of the Five Rings when that launched, the LCG from Fantasy Flight. That's a lot of fun. Its release schedule, and again, because I was only able to dabble to a certain extent due to work commitments, it launched with content. The thing with any card game is content is always coming out at the wrong speed. It's either too quick or too slow. That's just a given. So it was slightly too slow for me, and it lost my interest. But it's a fantastic game, and I really hope to return to that at some point. I then fooled about with Shadespire for a bit, GW's quote-unquote competitive miniatures game. And I think, if anything, that was sort of my gateway drug back. That's just like Malifaux light. And what I'd say to anyone listening to this who likes Shadespire, I would really give Malifaux a try. If you want to kind of take that step between sort of Shadespire and quote-unquote a proper war game, not that I really subscribe to that view, but you see what I mean, then really consider taking a look at Malifaux, because that's fantastic and a really really positive. It really kind of. It was funny. I was at our FLGS and somebody I was playing Shadespire with me asked me about Malifaux, and afterwards, Neil asked our FLGS owner just described back to me watching me get myself back into Malifaux by explaining to this person that had asked me the question what was. What is Malifaux? What's Malifaux all about? And after sort of boring them to tears for 45 minutes about the joys of Malifaux, I was back into the game.
You talked yourself into it.
I worked myself to blame. I'm an addict. Yeah,
that's really funny. That's good. So I've got one of the guys that I played a lot of Malifaux with. We kind of lost him when the new edition got announced, and plus I think he was getting kind of frustrated with it. He went over and is really enjoying Shadespire and has been pushing me. So I got myself a warband, and I'm going to be trying it out here in a little bit because I hear good things about it. But it's interesting that you consider it kind of as a gateway to Malifaux and Malifaux Light. I'll be very anxious to see what I think too. That's great.
Yeah, and I'll just be really clear. It's not a bad game. I just want to be really clear about Shadespire. It's not a bad game. It's actually, it is for what it's trying to do. It's really good. It's just, it does, you can see decision, you can see sort of aspect of Malifaux in its design, which is quite interesting. But yeah, it's certainly worth a look. It just couldn't hold my attention the same way Malifaux can.
Yeah, I think the reason I bought into it and I'm going to try it is because there's enough things that are different. One, I love the play time looks good, is nice. Getting a couple quick games in. it's got aspects of other games that I've liked and stuff. So I think I'm going to enjoy it. I'm not hearing from anybody that it's anywhere nearly as deep as Malifaux, which is the number one reason why I like Malifaux. So.
Yeah, I mean, if I was to criticize it, I always hate this kind of people from other games criticizing other games. So I want to be really clear. It is a good game. It does have the kind of the one thing it does have is the thing I dislike most about Blood Bowl, which is like the don't roll a one simulator element of kind of Blood Bowl, and that's probably something. I mean, you talk about game length. Yeah, I mean, Shadespire is a nice quick game, which is great. What was interesting was playing L5R, having come from Malifaux, was like. L5R as an LCG is quite a long played card game that takes quite a while to play. So most card games you're playing in 20, 30 minutes, maybe
right.
Top end. L5R is 45 minutes to an hour, and people go, "Oh, this takes forever." And I go,
wow.
I've just come from Malifaux, where 2.5 hour game, and you go, "This feels like a breeze," I'm turning up to events in the morning, playing 4 rounds, and getting home at a sensible time. It's it's a very different world. So yeah.
That's funny. All right, we're going to take another quick break, and when we get back, I want to talk to James about the event Hall of Eggs that he just went to. We'll be right back. So the reason I reached out to James to try to get him on the podcast is he talked about an event that he just had played in. And I really had not talked or heard a whole lot about the events happening over the UK. So I was, that's why I reached out to James, among other reasons. But so James, you played in the event was called Hall of Eggs. What happened?
Yeah, so it's Hall of Eggs, which is one of the sort of the routine sort of traditional events that are run. I think this is the 7th year of Hall of Eggs, run by one of our fantastic TOs, and David Brown, just to really call out, he does more for the UK Malifaux scene than anyone else. And, prolific TO, brilliant guy, and has been sort of a massive supporter and a massive reason why we have such a good scene in the UK. So really wanted to go down and support his event. Like I said, I've done a number of Hall of Eggs, and they're called Hall of Eggs in reference to the old Gremlin Egg Hauler Easter special edition model.
Right.
And it always happens around Easter, so then prizes include Easter eggs. So it's that's sort of the name, which I appreciate probably might go past some people, because I think the egg haulers are old metals from first edition, quite hard to get hold of now. So yeah, I had a great day. It was held at Battlefield Hobbies, which is down in the Midlands. Again, another really good venue, run by some terrific people who again do a lot in a number of sort of different gaming scenes. So they're really they're worth checking out if you're ever in the area. And a sort of fantastic store. So it was as I said, scene's relatively reduced at the moment, so there were only 12 of us for the event. Travel with a teammate, Paul, and we're able to go down, get 3 rounds of Malifaux in, and have a good time. So
let's talk about round 1, James.
Yeah, so round 1, my first time playing against Rezzers in M3, so always at a moment, and Rezzers are probably my traditional enemy as an Arcanist. I sort of seem to have spent more time playing them than anybody else, so it was interesting to play them for the first time. It was a game of reckoning, and I kind of pre-planned to play a different master in each round, and I chose to stick with that, which is probably a mistake. But I kind of stuck to my guns and decided to play Tina. In hindsight, should have played Keris. My opponent played McMorning, first time playing McMorning, and he's always a bit frightening. So McMorning, a couple of Kentauri, a couple of little gassers, rogue necromancy. So fairly aggressive list come barreling at me. My Windgammon failed to leap at any available moment, as did my Blessed of December. But I was able to sort of hang in there while sort of desperately trying to keep Rasputina from having any unnecessary surgery. And between that and that and playing a reasonably sort of defensive game, I was able to sort of hold a 4-4 draw, which could very easily have gone a couple of points either way at various stages. But a very sort of nail-biting finish against McMorning, and he's certainly an interesting master to face.
When if with all the games you're playing, one of the concerns that I had about the scoring system, and to be clear, there's a lot of things about the new strats and schemes that I love, and how things are scored that I love. One concern I had though was there being a lot of ties. Are you seeing that? You mentioned round 1 you tied.
I don't know if I'm seeing a lot of it yet. I think we're at one of those points where, experience is very different. There are players coming in playing the first games at these events. There are players who've been playing, a lot. I'm probably in the mid level, to be honest. I've not been playing through sort of closed beta or relatively aggressively through a lot of the beta process. So you've got different players at different skill level, different experience levels. So where you've got mismatching skill, you tend to get wider results in terms of points differences as the scene matures and players get better. What I've seen in previous editions is sort of scores tighten up. Mm-hmm. So it's not something I'm seeing a concern with now. It may well be something to watch. There's various things that can be done in gaining grounds if that becomes a problem, though. You can have, schemes, and strats where you can have strats where only one player is able to score, which will pretty much in this edition eradicate that, I would expect, as a risk. But right now, there is a risk to that. But I'm not seeing it yet. Whether we start to see it when skill gaps close, I don't know.
Yeah, no, it's a good point. So you tie up round one, you head into round two. Who'd you face?
Yeah, so heading into round two with plenty of jokes about me submarining from various teammates. Tied up round one, walked into round two. Now round two was Dreamer, and my first game against Neverborn in this edition. Interesting. My opponent was playing a very sort of themed Dreamer list, Widow Weaver, 3 Stitch Togethers, Teddy. So a pretty standard kind of themed Dreamer list. The interesting thing playing, so we were playing Plant Explosives, and my opponent possibly just hesitated a moment too much in turn one, was probably a little bit fearful of my Caris, and sort of deployed a little bit too far back in flank deployment. So he was deployed almost inside the sort of the 9-inch square of the L rather than the full L shape of that, and that really cost him in terms of pace getting off the line. This is the game I mentioned earlier, where at one point I think I was getting 6 pass tokens at the start of turn 3.
Wow.
We were sort of fairly heavily outnumbered, fairly early on. But the kind of the boost of speed I got by being a bit further forward managed to sort of afford me enough of an advantage to sort of get up in the game, and I managed to end 3-0. So a win, but probably a win. A win I'm not sure I'd repeat. Every day of the week. What's interesting is have a look at Stitch Togethers. I'm looking at those cards and going, I think we might. They're going to be very interesting going forward. I think they've probably got my early eye on something that people are going to complain about, even if they don't necessarily need a nerf. They're certainly a very frightening prospect to take on.
Yeah, I'm hearing that. I've yet to face them, but some of the local Neverborn players are big fans. So I'm going to have to take a look at the card.
Yeah, there's the sort of the more you read of the card, you're hang on a minute, this is going to be very fun. But in fairness, fortunately, the big sacks of cloth. So funnily enough, those burn. So Keris didn't have too much of a problem. Nice.
So a nice win in round 2. So coming into round 3, were you top table in round 3?
Table 2 on round 3.
Okay.
So we've got a few players were on 2 wins at this point. Obviously, I'm on a win and a draw. So going to round 3, get an Arcanist mirror, and my first Arcanist mirror of 3rd edition. So that's played a lot against Guild and Thunders so far, but not played a lot against other Arcanists. So round 3 was looking at the objectives was a pretty good setup for Sandeep. It's got Hold Up Their Forces. It's got Vendetta, which Sandeep's got some tricks for, and Breakthrough playing into I think it was a Wedge Turf War. So it's a pretty good matchup for Sandeep. My opponent puts down Hoffman. And I like Hoffman. I got a soft spot for him. I used to play him in Guild at the very end of 1st edition, and he's been one I've been meaning to get back on the table. And I think this game probably sold me on giving him a go. I think the internet so far is pretty down on Hoffman. I'm looking at going, I'm not sure why. I think there's some really interesting stuff in there. And again, it was a moment where my opponent sort of slightly hesitated. And one of the things I'm finding about Turf War is the trick. So I've got no armor removal in my case, which is an oversight on my part. So my opponent goes off and I go, oh, I have nothing that ignores armor. So I'm not going to be killing a lot. So I had to pick something fairly mobile. And one of the interesting things with Turf War is I think what you're trying to do with Turf War is get the two nearest markers to you flipped, and then get as much of your stuff as possible into your opponent's half, so it's much harder for them to turn it off by killing.
Right.
And I was able to my opponent just slightly hesitated coming out of his deployment zone and had some actually fairly effective shooting from those constructs. What I hadn't realized is a lot of those harpoon guns on the back of them are range 12. So they're pretty, they can come out pretty quick when they're fast and sort of firing harpoon guns on positive flips at you with built-in triggers. It's actually quite frightening, and some stuff got shot off fairly early that I wasn't expecting to lose. But just because he'd hesitated to take those shots meant he wasn't as far forward as he could have been. So my guys were able to sort of get round the sides over the halfway line, and so then we were able to play the game in his half of the board, not mine. At which point it was much easier for me to turn the game. It was also, like I say, it was an objective set that was sort of fairly heavily favoured for Hoffman. For Sandeep, and I managed to get out of that 7-2, which is a big win.
That is a big win. Wow. but it got you interested in Hoffman.
Yeah, I think most constructs being armor 2 now is massive along the survivability line. The key wording means there's not as much armor removal as once there was, and Hoffman himself can cancel armor removal. He's sort of got the counter to that on his own ability. So I think actually that's pretty good. There's a lot of native pushers in Hoffman and a lot of ability to sort of boost AP. Now, how good he's in Guild, I don't know, because Guild's stuff are for objective runners. There's sort of a lack of those in Guild, which I think ultimately may come back to haunt the faction as we go through the edition. But Arcanists, now we've got some pretty decent generic objective runners and cheap objective runners you can hire out of keyword, which means if you want to go in play Hoffman in Arcanists, you're not necessarily losing out on the you're not necessarily losing out on sort of some of the objective running that you'll need in order to make that work. Right. So bit of range, decent survivability, a lot of native pushers, things I really look for in a crew. And also, I just love steam-powered robots. That's why I'm an Arcanist. Give me steam-powered robots and I'm a happy man. So, definitely looking at getting Hoffman.
Are you sore about Ramos getting pushed out?
Yeah, so a lot of people know Ramos is my favorite master, and I think when that was probably announced relatively early on, I think my take is, look, if Ramos has to go away in order to have a better third edition, then I kind of take that. I really like the guy, and he's not dead. He could very much come back at some point in the future, and I do hope he does. But they can't keep we talked about this earlier. We can't keep printing new models if no models are ever going to leave the game. Yeah. And the only way we'd have to sell models in order to stay in business. The only way that they're going to sell more models is either got to take some stuff out of the game, or have us play with more models. And I don't think have us play with more models is the answer, right? So their options are sort of power creep or take stuff out, and I would much rather they take stuff out. And what I'm really hoping we get as we go forward actually is more models being kicked out the back of the game that are a bit sort of long-standing models and having the story move on. And so, and I appreciate for players, there are people who are probably more invested in certain masters than I am. I do love Ramos, but he'll sit on my shelf now and supervise the Arcanist construction in my hobby room. And, if he comes back, he comes back.
Yeah, I think a rotation's fine. And I think my first take was similar to yours, where I'm like, why are they doing this? This seems bad. But the more I've thought about it, I'm like, you look at any game that has legs, and out, you see this. You see it in miniature games. You especially see it in card games.
Yeah.
And it's okay. You have to get rid of that emotional entitlement that, I bought this model, so I have the right to play it the way I want to play it. And I think once you kind of let go of that, you'll be fine.
Yeah, exactly that. And I think the interesting, and that's the challenge, right? So in a card game, you don't invest. So in a card game, characters come back because you can have different versions of characters, and you don't invest the kind of time and energy in sleeving a card that you do in building and painting a Malifaux model.
True.
So I get the level of emotional investment. Entitlement's a word that probably gets thrown around too much, and it's not a criticism of anyone necessarily, but I think gamer entitlement's probably a loaded term. But I think there is a point of Weird sell, or any games company, they sell you a model to use with a current set of rules. Nobody takes that model off you, and no one takes that current set of rules off you. Mm-hmm. But I do think there comes a point where you have to, you have to be able to let go and say, okay, well, look, we need to move the game on because we got the commercial imperative exists. I mean, you look at, it's probably an unpopular opinion, but you look at the people who are really upset about the death of Warhammer Fantasy and the birth of AOS. That's a direct reaction to the fact they couldn't sell fantasy figures to fantasy players because they've all got an army. They don't buy anything new, and GW can't continue to support you for free. And that's it's probably an unpopular opinion, and I'm sure their PR department would not put it in those terms, but that's kind of where you got to with AOS and GW, and sort of the thing with Weird and Malifaux is Weird would it's more likely Weird would not be in a position to do that. It's more likely Weird would fold. So if you love Malifaux, you've got to be prepared to move on, and that's the same with any smaller game, I think. And and it's not to delegitimize people having an emotional reaction, but I think the reality is, and also, I'm just going to say this, I don't think anyone loves Colody. I think Colody's been filth for 2 editions, so people love playing filth. They might be upset that Colody's no longer filth than in the edition, or maybe I haven't played him, but, I do think there comes a point. Now, some people have asked me about Dead Man's Hand in tournaments. I think for now, if it encourages more people to come back, which it will do, let's have Dead Man's Hand stuff in tournaments for a while, but I'd like us to think, actually going back to an earlier question, where are we in a year? I'd like to think we've moved on from that, and we can move on with some new stuff. And if some more masters have to die, well, let's embrace our inner Game of Thrones. Let's have new and exciting toys.
Yeah, I as much as you want to ignore the commercial aspect of it, I completely agree, James. And unlike GW, where they can handle the death of a game and the rebirth again, smaller companies may not be able to. So I'm with you on that. But we're bearing the lead. Talk to me about how you finished. Where'd you finish? I know you were podium.
Yeah, absolutely. So 2 wins and a draw were enough to put me in second, and so very pleased with that. The overall winner, Mark's a returning player and a brilliant guy, so it was great to see him get first. But no, came in second. I'm really pleased with that for my second event of the new edition. So 2 for 2 on podiums, and looking forward to more tournaments coming up.
All right, that's beautiful. Thanks, my friend. This was great, and I hope it's not the last time you come on. I would love to check in with you in a couple months and kind of check the pulse and see what's going on over there in the UK with Arcane Reservoir being silent for now, and we're hearing some out of the Flippin' Weirds, but not as much as I'd like. I want to hear more, because I think that part of what was great about second edition was looking at the 2 different metas, looking at the US meta and, competitively and the UK meta competitively, because there's a lot of parallels. There's a lot of differences. Both metas made fun of the Australian meta, which I think was healthy for the game. So, but I might bug you again here, James, in a couple months to check in. Anything you want to plug?
So a few events coming up, but I'm not gonna read out the event calendar. I'm just gonna sort of say, if you go to the UK section of the Weird forums, there's an event calendar on there. I'd really encourage players to check that out and play more games. And just a plug for my friendly local gaming store, Leodis Games in North Leeds. They're a fantastic store, doing brilliantly. They're a great place to play and a great place to order from. So if you're looking for more Malifaux or something from any of the other major systems, take a look at leodisgames.com. They're a really brilliant FLGS, and they really deserve your support.
Obviously, I don't take part of the commerce with them, but I follow them on Twitter because they seem like just like a great organization. So that's good. For those of you out there, you already know how to find the podcast because you're listening to it. Don't forget to go to the website, thirdfloorwars.com, and make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel. We've got a lot of great content going up there. Just search for thirdfloorwars.com. James, take care and good luck.
Thank you. My pleasure, and anytime.
Cheers. Thanks for listening. Be sure to rate and write a review on this podcast so we can find more people almost as cool as you are. Check us out on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube by searching for Third Floor Wars. That's THIRD. We'll catch you next time on the third floor.